Hi guys, Goffy here and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to update you on the Leica M11. I've had this camera for about 4 months now at this point, and I think that's a really good time to do a review. Before this camera, I had the Leica M10, and I was absolutely loving that camera, but I sold it along with some camera gear I had lying around, and also some money up front to be able to purchase this M11. At the time, it felt a little bit crazy, and I did worry that I was going to regret how much I was giving up to be able to buy it. So in today's video, I want to give you an update. How am I feeling 4 months in? So first up, I want to address the thing that I was probably most scared or worried about coming into ownership of the M11. That was the fact I'd read so many reports online of these cameras crashing and sometimes bricking and needing to be sent back to Leica. Now at the time, I did a little bit of research and I have no idea whether this is true or not, but it seemed to me that the newer the camera, the less likely it was to have these problems. This camera is 4 months old to me, but the previous owner had it 2 months and they bought it from new. So this camera is only about 6 months old. In terms of my experience, it crashed once on the day I bought it and I was using an old memory card. Since then, the camera hasn't crashed at all. Firmware updates, I haven't done any. I'm a little bit too worried about doing one in case it does brick. If there's something in the future that comes out, I may do one, but right now I'm happy with the camera as it is, and I have no idea whether that's through luck or judgment, but it hasn't really crashed at all, only on day one. So I'm super fortunate, and my biggest fear of this camera hasn't been realized, and I'm very thankful for that. When it comes to the design of this camera, there is a lot of things I'm absolutely loving, and most of them can be found on the bottom. The new battery in this camera lasts a full day, no sweat. I actually have a spare battery and I never find myself using it. I find myself leaving one battery on charge during the day whilst I'm out shooting with the other. Battery life is one of the biggest improvements over the M10. I used to find that I would drain through batteries on the M10, and I'm someone who uses the LCD quite a lot. I'm not ashamed to say it, but yeah, M10 used to drain the battery. This M11 does exceptionally well. The other thing on the base plate is the fact that we now have a USB-C port and can do power bank charging. I do find myself doing that at times. Just the placement of the port is a bit ridiculous. I'm not sure where else I would put it, but it feels like if you want to use that port, you have to put your camera screen down on a surface, which just feels a little bit weird. I wouldn't really do that with my phone, let alone a £7,000 camera, to the point I now have a screen protector on the back, so I feel a little bit less conscious about doing it. One thing that's really minor, I don't baby my cameras too much, but the M10 and M240 used to have a sticker on the bottom, and it meant putting your camera down on a table. I didn't really think twice about it, but this doesn't have any protection on the bottom. I was a little bit worried that maybe it would scratch up and mark up a little bit, but as we sit here now, I'm 4 months in, 2 months with the previous owner, and it's still looking pretty new. So it was a little bit of a minor concern that, again, hasn't been realized. Another big design choice coming into the purchase of this camera is deciding what color to go with. For the first time, it makes quite a big difference. These silver models are made out of brass and are quite a lot heavier than the black models made out of aluminium. If you really want to prioritize lightweight, then you're gonna wanna go with a black one. For me, coming into the purchase of the camera, I didn't really care. It was more about what camera came up at a good deal. Having actually owned this silver camera now for the last 4 months, do you know what? I actually really like the fact it's silver. The extra weight, I don't really notice. I think we're talking about 100 grams. It's not really a big deal for me. It means this camera, I think, weighs the same as the M10, whereas the black M11 weighs quite a bit less than the M10. The M10 weight never really bothered me, nor does the weight of this camera. One thing that I do really like with the silver camera is how good silver lenses look, like my silver Ultron. What I didn't realize coming into this was the fact that silver Leica lenses are so expensive. They sell at a big premium over the black counterparts, and a lot of the lenses that I'd actually quite like the 28mm Summicron, are limited edition lenses and sell for like 2 times more than the black equivalent. The good thing is with a silver camera is they do look good with both black and silver lenses, whereas a black camera can sometimes look a little bit odd with a silver lens. It also matches very, very well with my Leica M6. The color match on the pair of them is almost perfect. And then I think the last thing design-wise that I've been really enjoying is the touchscreen. I didn't expect to like this. I find I'm so used to using physical controls on cameras that I've been really slow to adopt the touchscreen on them. The interface when you press the menu button on the M11 does feel very intuitive to touch. It definitely took me a bit of getting used to it, but now I'm 4 months in, I do find myself actually using the touchscreen. And on other cameras that I've owned, I've basically never touched them other than to move a focus point around. There is one last thing actually when it comes to the design choice, kind of design again, and that is the internal memory. It has saved me twice at this point. One of them was a trip into London where I left my memory card at home. Another one was far more local, probably could have popped home to get one, but the fact that I didn't need to, big win. I don't know why more cameras aren't putting internal memory in them, even if it is just a small amount. Next up then, let's talk about the images, the outputs from this camera. Now, to be honest with you guys, the way I rationalized the purchase of this camera was through the stuff we've already spoken about, the kind of quality of life improvements and design changes over the previous M10. Where I didn't really expect to see any benefit was in the file outputs, because I loved the outputs of the M10. And this is the bit where I have been pleasantly surprised. The files coming out of this M11 are absolutely stunning once you edit them. That is a little bit of an annoying caveat. The M10 produced these really nice warm saturated files, whereas the M11 produces quite cold feeling magenta tinted images. But once you start to edit them, they really come alive. I love the colors and the flexibility that these files offer. Then I think we come on to probably this camera's biggest feature from a performance point of view, the 60 megapixels. I am a little bit of a serial cropper. I'm somebody who runs around quite frequently with a 28mm lens. I don't worry too much about my framing, I worry about it later. I'll frequently crop in post and frame in post. I know it's a bad habit, but having 60 megapixels makes it a lot easier to do. Now, one thing I said in my initial review was that I thought I would run around using 60 megapixels all the time. The reality of that is, no, I don't, because it filled up my Lightroom library so fast because I use cloud storage. So I actually find myself using 18 megapixels most of the time, unless I know I'm out doing something that is very specifically kind of photography focused, whether it's making something for a YouTube video or for client work, then I'll use 60 megapixels. For just about everything else, I find myself using 18 and the files still look very, very good. So in use then, this camera is exactly like I'd expected. It feels basically the same as my M6, my M240 and my M10 did in terms of its operation. But now we have all of these added creature comforts, and for most people, the shooting experience of these cameras is why people buy them. I think there's a couple of things with this camera that stand out as maybe being a little bit behind the curve, and they're two things I would quite like to see in a Leica M12. Now, purists, you might not like either of these two, so cover your ears now. The first thing I would quite like to see is some IBIS. I found myself this year experimenting a little bit with using some really slow shutter speeds to add some kind of motion blur into my images, and having IBIS would have been super beneficial. I think having IBIS would also help counter the high megapixel count and needing a high shutter speed as well. I think if you have IBIS, you can bring that shutter speed back down a little bit too. So I would really like to see IBIS in a camera of the future. The other one, and this one is probably the one that I think might offend a few people, is I'd quite like to see a tilt screen. I like getting down and shooting reflections, and not having a tilt screen can sometimes be a little bit annoying. Now, I know in the Leica Q, and I think even in the new SL3, the way Leica have been making these tilt screens makes them stick out from the body a little bit, but then other camera manufacturers, even like the Fuji's, the X100V, they sit nice and flush. It's definitely possible, and it is something I would like to see. I would definitely get some value out of a tilt screen on a Leica M camera. Apologies if that's offended any of you out there. And more recently, I mentioned it in my Leica Q3 video that sometimes the Leica M, it just feels a little bit too focused for some situations, mainly social situations with friends and family. I feel like having a Leica M feels a little bit awkward, and sometimes having autofocus for these more casual events and times in life would be beneficial. I feel like I've frequently had a pretty big life change. I moved into a new home and I didn't really take many pictures because having an M camera on me whilst moving in just didn't feel right, but the X100V did feel very good. If you've been wondering what all the little codes mean, down at the bottom of my images, it links to my stackable preset pack. As an example, if you take this image and apply basic adjustments 2 and then tone curve 1, you end up with this final images. They stack on top of each other and you can use various different combinations, and the codes at the bottom tell you exactly what I've used on the photos I'm showing you. If you're interested and want to find out more, there is a link down in the description to the pack and a video explaining them in a little more detail. Anyway, back to talking about the Leica M11. And then next up, let's really quickly talk about the M10 versus the M11. Now, the M11's problem is its super high price tag. Here in the UK, the Leica M10 is half the price of a Leica M11. And for that reason, I do think that the Leica M10 is the sweet spot in the Leica lineup. It is the best value proposition if you're looking for a digital Leica camera. If you compare it to the M240 that came before it, the price difference is reasonably small and the M10 is considerably better in just about every single way. But then when you look from the M10 up to the M11, there is in no real tangible way this camera being worth twice the price. For me, I personally don't regret the purchase. I use this camera all the time. I'm loving it, I'm really enjoying it, and I do like those quality of life improvements, but it's definitely not worth twice what a Leica M10 is. So for a lot of people that reach out and ask me what digital M they should buy, the people that don't know the answer to that question, I pretty much always point them towards an M10. If you are somebody that is already fully invested in that rangefinder ecosystem and you already know that you love these cameras, then maybe the M11 makes more sense. But I do think if you're venturing into Leica for the first time, the M10 is probably the sensible choice, if there is ever a sensible choice when it comes to Leica. So there we have it then. In short, the quality of life improvements that this camera offers have really lived up to the hype. For me, I am really enjoying the Leica M11 to the point that I don't regret spending all of that extra money and selling some camera gear to be able to purchase it. It's definitely not the sensible choice when it comes to picking which Leica camera to buy, but I don't regret it at all. The big thing that stood out over the last few months for me is just how nice the files are once you've edited them coming out of this camera. It was the bit I didn't really expect to see a massive improvement, and it is the bit that has definitely surpassed my expectations. So there we have it then. If you have any questions about this camera or my previous cameras or how they compare, ask them down in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. And if you've enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like and subscribe. You'll see plenty more of this Leica M11 on the channel because I'm absolutely loving it. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.